Hello everyone, Jake here with Unreal RPG Mastery. In this video, we're going to create a new weapon and implement multiple weapon styles. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is create a new weapon, go to Combat System Blueprints Actors, and we need to create a child of the base weapon. We'll call this one BP underscore Greatsword. Okay, now open it up. And for the static mesh, we need to add if you have the course files, you should have a Greatsword static mesh. Now we need to attach this weapon to the character. So go to the combat character, select the character mesh, and open it up. And go to the skeletal mesh. Let's add an unequip attach socket so we can attach it to the character's back. We'll call this one Greatsword back socket. Now we need to add the preview mesh, add the Greatsword. Now go ahead and position the weapon on the character's back. So just like we've done before, you can update the translation and rotation of the mesh. And you can spend as much time as you want to on this, but this is okay for me. Okay, and once you've done that, you can go ahead and copy the socket name. Go to the Greatsword, and here in class defaults, we need to add the attach socket. Okay, now let's add the hand socket for the Greatsword. So go to the right hand bone and add a socket. We can call this one Greatsword hand socket. Okay, now add the Greatsword as a preview mesh and adjust it in the character's hand. Now copy the Greatsword hand socket and go to the Greatsword and paste that into the hand socket name. And for the item, we'll select Greatsword. Okay. Now when I equip the Greatsword, it equips to the character's back, and he can equip the weapon to his hand. The character does use the wrong draw and sheath animation. Let's go ahead and add different toggle combat animations for each weapon, so that way the Greatsword won't use the Lot Sword toggle combat animations. So to implement that, we're going to add the toggle combat animations into the base weapon actor. So open up the base weapon actor, and inside the base weapon actor, we can add a new variable. We'll make this up top anim montage. We'll call this animation enter combat, and we'll create another one, and we'll call this animation exit combat. And we can add this to a category animations. Okay, now let's create animation montages for enter combat and exit combat for the Greatsword. So go to Combat System, Course Files, Animations, and open the Greatsword folder. Okay, now open up the Equip folder, and here are the animations for enter combat and exit combat. So we do create anim montages for both of them. Okay, now open up the enter combat, and it looks like the animation isn't correct. He's putting his weapon away, so what we can do to fix that is open up the asset, and go to the rate scale, and we need to make that -1. And now he's pulling the weapon from his back into his hands. So now let's open up the enter combat montage again, and at the correct point in the animation, we need to add the attach weapon actor animation notify. For this one, attach to hand will be true, and for the exit combat, go to the correct point in the animation, and add the animation notify. For this one, attach to hand will be false. Okay, save all. Now we can go to the Greatsword, select class defaults. So now let's add the enter combat animation here, and the exit combat animation here. We can do the same thing for the tough sword. Enter combat for this one will be light weapon draw, and exit combat for this one will be light weapon disarm. Okay, let's go back to the combat character. Now we can get a reference to our main weapon. We can get enter combat animation. And we can get the exit combat animation. Okay, now compile and save. Let's test it out and see how it works. When I equip the tough sword, he plays the tough sword animation. When I equip the heavy sword, he plays the heavy sword animation. But it looks like we forgot to set it to upper body for the heavy sword. So let's go ahead and do that now. Browse to asset, and let's open up both the animations. Set the default group to upper body. Okay, let's test it out. Yep, everything seems to be working as intended. You may notice an issue where he has both of the weapons in his hands after you pick both of them up. We're actually going to fix this issue in the next video where we cover bug fixes. Now that the character can pick up 2 different kinds of weapons, and he plays 2 different animations for each one, now let's work on changing the animations in the animation blueprint. To implement that, we're going to create a combat type enum, and update that enum in the animation blueprint. If you're not familiar with an enum, or enumeration, is a list of numbers associated with a name. So an enum is a bit more human readable than assigning each weapon style as an integer. I personally prefer an enum for something like this. So to create a new enum, let's go to the Combat System Blueprints folder, and let's create a new folder. We'll call this one enums. Okay, now open the folder. Okay, now right click, and under blueprints, we need to create a new enumeration. And we can call this one e_combat type. Okay, now open it up. Let's add a few entries. The first entry will be none. The second entry will be light sword. And the third entry will be great sword. Now that we have the enum created, we can go to the base weapon and add it as a variable. So let's create a new variable. I'll make this variable combat type. And now let's call it combat type. We can add this to initialization. Okay, now compile and save. Now let's go to the tough sword, and for the tough sword we'll set this as a light sword, and for the great sword we'll set this one as a great sword. Okay, now we need to update this value in the animation blueprint so we can change the animations. But before we do that, we need to set up some animations first. So let's go to Combat System, Course Files, Animations, and let's do the light sword first, and open up the locomotion folder, and let's create an animation blend space. So go to Animation, and we're going to need a blend space 1D. And select the SK_mannequin, the UE5 mannequin, and we'll call this one light sword _BS for blend space. Blend spaces are assets where you specify animations along a graph at various points called samples. The overall animation is calculated by blending between the points on the graph based on input values for each axis. For example, a locomotion system that blends between directional movement and idle animations can be created. For the horizontal axis, we'll make that speed. Minimum axis value can be 0, maximum axis value will be 500. Okay, so first I need to extend this out a little bit. And now we can add the idle animation. Add that to the very beginning. Now I need jog forward. Add that to the end. And also add jog forward to the middle. You can hold Control and move your mouse to preview the animation. This blend space is blending between our movement animations based on a speed value. Now let's go to Animations, Great Sword, Locomotion, and let's create another new blend space. We get blend space 1D. We're going to call this one Great Sword _BS. Now we need to do the same thing we did with the light sword blend space. So add the idle animation. Horizontal axis will be speed. Maximum axis value will be 500. Jog forward. Okay, now save all. Now let's open up the animation blueprint. Open up AVP Mani. I'm going to add the animations here. First I'm going to add the light sword blend space. Now get the ground speed and plug that into speed. Now let's test Great Sword. Okay, now let's work on changing these animations based on the weapon style. And to do that, we're going to use a blueprint interface to tell the animation blueprint to update the animations. So let's go to Combat System Blueprints, Interfaces, and let's create a new interface. So under Blueprints, we need to select Blueprint Interface. We'll call this one Anim Instance BPI. So this blueprint interface will only be used for the animation blueprint. We can call this one Update Combat Type. And the input variable will be combat type. Okay, and before we do anything else, just make sure you go ahead and close out the things that we don't need anymore. Okay, now go to the base weapon, and here on equipped, you need to drag out from character and get anim instance. And then we need to get the anim instance from the mesh. And then we need to call update combat type. And the one that we need to call is update combat type message. So this will notify the anim instance of the owner character to update the combat type. So get the combat type value and plug that into combat type. Compile and save. Okay, now go to ABB Mani, and we need to implement the interface. So go to class settings. Under implemented interfaces, we need to add anim instance BPI. Now that we've added that, we can go to the event graph. Make sure you compile the blueprint first, and then we need to type in event update combat type. And we can drag out from the combat type and promote that to a variable. And here in the animation graph, we can call blend poses by combat type. The blend poses by enum node performs a time-based blend between poses using an enum value as the key. A default pose can be used, and additional poses can be added for the values identified within the enum connected through the active enum value. Additionally, each pose has a float value blend time that is used to control how long it will take to blend into the pose. And the active enum value will be combat type. The default pose is the only pose that shows up. To add the other ones, you can just right click, and here you can add light sword and great sword. So let's go ahead and add both of those. And we can take this locomotion save cache pose and plug this blend poses by combat type into it. And create a new save cache pose. Call this one unarmed locomotion. Okay, now we need to use cache pose unarmed locomotion. That'll be the default pose. And now we can plug the light sword blend space into the light sword pose and the great sword blend space into the great sword pose. Okay, now let's test it out and see if that works. So the character is playing his normal unarmed locomotion. When I pick this weapon up, he's playing his weapon locomotion. When I pick the other weapon up, he's playing his two-handed locomotion. But the character does play the weapon locomotion even though the weapon is attached to his side, so let's go ahead and fix that as well. We can fix that by creating a new function in the anim instance BPI. So let's create a new function. We'll call this one update weapon attached to hand. We'll create an input for that, and it'll be of type boolean. We'll call this input attached to hand. So this will just let the animation blueprint know if the weapon is attached to the hand or not. Okay, now compile and save. And to update this, we need to go to the base weapon. And now let's create a function to update this attached to hand variable. So create a new function. We'll call this one set attached to hand. And this will set the attached to hand boolean and also get the owner, cast a character. And from there we'll get the anim instance. And we'll update weapon attached to hand. And we'll update the animation blueprint with whatever value we set here. Okay, now go to the combat character. And now we need to set this variable with a function instead of just setting the variable directly. Also, to make it to where we can't set the value directly, you can just go to the base weapon and make this a private variable. We also need to create a function to read the value is attached to hand. And that's going to need a return value of type boolean. And we'll return the attached to hand boolean. Make sure this function is pure. Okay, now compile and save. Let's go back to the character. And once we compile, you'll see it's going to warn us that the variable is private. So we need to get the function is attached to hand and plug that in here. And now we need to just set attached to hand. Set that to true. And here we need to set it to false. Okay, once we've done that, we need to go back to the animation blueprint and go to the event graph. And we need event update weapon attached to hand. And now we need to promote attached to hand to a variable. And in the anim graph, we need to do blend poses by bool. The active value is going to be attached to hand. If true, we use the blend poses by combat type enum pose. If false, we use the unarmed locomotion cache pose. Okay, now compile and save. Now let's test it out and see how it works. As soon as we get into the game, the character plays his unarmed locomotion animations. And when we equip the tough sword, he's still playing the same animations. But when we attach the weapon to the character's hand, he plays the weapon locomotion. Let's also test this weapon out. Like I said, these bugs that you see here, we're going to fix those in the next video, so don't worry too much about them right now. The important thing is that we got the locomotion working for this video. And that brings us to the end of this video. In this video, we implemented multiple weapon styles, created a blend space for each weapon, implemented functionality to play different animations for entering and exiting combat, and we also implemented functionality that updates the character's locomotion when equipping a new weapon. Thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to cover fixing bugs.